Thank you for tuning in to CT with CPD Podcast with your host, Sharon Diggs. This week's educational therapy session is going to be titled, Last I Checked, Broken Crowns Still Work. We're going to touch on a topic or a subject that I feel that is constantly bashed on social media platforms, being what I call being emotionally unavailable. I think a lot of times we bash people, men and women, who are emotionally unavailable because there's this level of emotional brokenness or trauma that we have experienced and we haven't been healed from. And so, opposed to bashing it, I want to kind of address how do we allow ourselves to get emotional healing. And this kind of ties back to the podcast that I did about 2 weeks ago called Me Versus Me. I am my only competition is with myself. And I shared the 2% mindset and how 98% of the population lives in their comfort zone. Well, if people are emotionally broken, then they're going to be unavailable to show up as their true selves. And then that makes sense as to why people tend to resort back to their comfort zone. It's a safe haven. They don't have to worry about what's going to happen because they've allowed themselves or conditioned themselves to stay in what I consider to be a safe space. And many of us have heard the saying that goes, broken crowns still color. Meaning if you have that broken crown, that it actually still works. And what does that mean? Broken crown still colors means in spite of everything that a person has done or been through, they still have a purpose and value. What is brokenness? Brokenness is a condition in which something has been damaged and it is unable to still function and cope in a way that they used to. What is emotional brokenness? What emotional brokenness feels like is that something has happened in our world that has broken us to a point that we don't know if we can ever put it back together again. You look around, you see everybody, you see people on social media, and everybody seems to be functioning just fine. So it appears. And then you wonder why you don't feel the same way. These thoughts can become overwhelming. They can become frustrating. And they can become, you actually could become angry about how you're feeling. People who tend to be emotionally broken tend to have low self-esteem and tend to be unhappy. A lot of the times when we're broken emotionally, we feel hopeless. We feel like we're in despair. Perhaps even sometimes we feel inadequate, like we're unworthy. We're unworthy of love. We're unworthy of blessings. Okay? So typically, for me, every podcast would not be a podcast if I did not do a Did You Know fact. So did you know, based on research done by Psychology Today and Forbes, they stated that on average, 80% of Americans have experienced some type of emotional brokenness and trauma in their lives. I can contest to this. As a person who has experienced trauma that has led into emotional brokenness, I'll give a few highlights of some things that have happened in my life that I know for a fact that left me emotionally broken. Growing up in an abusive household with an alcoholic father, not seeing healthy relationships growing up. Most of my childhood, I saw men who were womanizers. I lost my mom at the age of 11. Had a bad accident in 2010, right after I turned 40. And a few unhealthy relationships, or a little toxicity, I should say. And also experienced a time where I went through bankruptcy. I think it's important that we understand emotional and brokenness and psychological trauma can be experienced several times through our lifespan. So we can have it as a child, we can have it in adolescence, We could, have it in our marriages. We can have it, we lose a loved one. I'll talk about some other traumatic events that can happen in our lives coming up shortly that can leave us broken. Emotional trauma is damage or any type of injury to the psyche after living through an extremely painful or frightening or distressing event. It challenges us to, and we're not able to function or cope normal after this event happens to us. And let's be clear, for each person who experiences something traumatic in their life will react differently. So for me, some people don't do well with death, and other people can do okay if someone loses a loved one. Everyone grieves differently. Okay? So any life experience that you have could be not so hard for you, but very challenging for someone else. And so this is where I feel where social media doesn't take into account, because you can handle a certain situation in a certain way doesn't mean that someone else can handle it emotionally, and it could leave them broken. And so we have to be open-minded to the fact that everybody shows up different when they are emotionally broken. Okay, so potentially traumatic events can be caused by sometimes just a singular event, and sometimes something that is an ongoing thing that happens over a series of time that leads to stress. And typically these events will show up and we're unprepared for them. They occur out of nowhere, out of the blue. We may feel powerless if this event happens because we couldn't prevent it. This event, like I said, could occur repeatedly. It could also be something that involved cruelty or bullying. It also could be something that happened during our childhood years. And I do believe that I think a lot of the times, a lot of our childhood feelings and emotions that were bottled up, because a lot of the times we can't really express them. And so they show up in our adulthoods. Traumatic events are typically defined as something that are both powerful and upsetting, and they can intrude into our daily life. Generally speaking, traumatic events involve at least a threat to our psychological as well as our physical well-being. A lot of the times these events have very little impact on one individual but can lead to significant distress to another, as I mentioned. And these typical events are some examples that can show up that leave us broken are natural disasters, a fire, an earthquake, a hurricane. COVID, I think, is a huge one. I mean, we all experienced that since 2020, and now we are walking through monkeypox. It's not funny, but it is definitely psychological, could be trauma to someone else. They just cannot cope in these events, a series of events that are happening around the world. Violence could show up like rape, child abuse, suicide, a series of a car accident, or you got hurt on the job, a workplace accident, acts of violence, racism. What I think is also important that we commonly tend to overlook that causes emotional brokenness and psychological trauma to people is relationship breakups, divorce, or losing a friend, somebody who you thought was a friend that you found out that wasn't truly a friend, being bullied, if you had some type of surgery, if you had a fall or injury, of course, a sudden unexpected death of a loved one. Again, I mentioned earlier that everyone grieves differently. Sickness, health issues, daddy issues, mommy issues, parent issues. We lose a job, we get fired. We lose an opportunity that could have been a big opportunity. It was a closed door opportunity for us. We lose sight of a lifelong dream or just a personal tragedy. There are so many different things that I think that we overlook as emotional brokenness, because people tend to feel like, oh, you're strong, you'll get through it, it's okay, stop being a baby. No, these are people's legitimate feelings, and they're entitled to feel that way if something upset them, if it angered them. And they're entitled to feel that way. And I think a lot of the times for men, more so than women, oh, you're not a punk, hush, stop crying. What you crying for? Why you acting like a little sissy? No, you're entitled to feel and have emotions. And I think more so as men, we tend to block off these emotional feelings. And we don't share them. We don't express them. And women, at some point, well, I don't want to seem like I'm a complainer. I don't want to feel like I'm nagging all the time. So we hold these emotions in. And what happens is they show up outwardly in our behaviors that aren't healthy for us. And what happens is if these psychological, emotional, broken people aren't treated, what tends to happen is our lives tend to grow smaller and smaller. We feel like we're in this closed bubble. And if left untreated, many times you'll find people will linger to substance abuse, alcoholism, sexual problems, inability to maintain a healthy relationship, hostility, constant arguments with loved ones, social withdrawal, constant feelings of being threatened, self-destructive behaviors, impulsive behaviors, uncomfortable reactive thoughts, inability to make healthy decisions and lifestyle choices, feelings of depression and shame and hopelessness and despair, feelings of being ineffective, feelings of feeling unworthy, feelings as though you are permanently damaged, which is not true. Just, we cannot let these emotional events define us. They can affect us, but they don't define who we are. And it doesn't mean that our past is going to be our future. And then, sometimes our belief system change. We believed in God, we trusted God, and then now at this point we're questioning God, or we just don't believe Him because we've had so many lives, a series of events that have emotionally broken us that we just don't trust it anymore. And I just feel like trouble don't last always. God gonna get you through. And then we have what is considered compulsive behavioral patterns that show up. Now, what I will say is trauma does change us. Just like a broken crown doesn't quite work the same way as an unbroken one, we are not the same after we endure emotional brokenness. The person that we once were before is no longer there. I do believe that God creates us for a purpose, on a purpose. And I do believe that it doesn't define us, but it does change us. And sometimes it can change us for the good, and prayerfully, it doesn't change us for the bad if we don't, treat ourselves and allow ourselves to experience what that trauma has done for us and own it and take accountability for how it's showing up in our lives. Because we were once all one whole intact person, and now trauma has came in our lives and it has broken us. And again, trauma does not define us. Again, it does affect who we are, but it doesn't define what the outcome of our life will be. So how do we find emotional healing? To face brokenness is, comes in so many facets. There are so many methods that we could use to restore and to renew us. For me, and I'm going to say, they say, God, definitely for me, God and the spiritual guidance helps me. I do believe professional and pastoral counseling helps. Support groups are out there for people. Exercise. I'm currently out here walking now as I'm doing this podcast. Diet, fitness routines. Supportive friends. resources to read, watch, and listen to. I used a lot of self-help books that were very beneficial to me in helping in my healing of emotional trauma that has happened in my life. But I think what is really key and people don't think about is mindfulness. When we are attempting to heal ourselves from emotional brokenness, it's so easy to get pulled back into the past events and catastrophize what the future will look like. But mindfulness can help you to stay in the present and stay in this moment and let you know that you are fine. Journaling, I find, is also a good tool that you can use to help you reason with yourself. Research has shown that journaling is an effective way to reach insights into the unconscious by helping people work through their feelings and making meaning of what has happened to them. A lot of times people can't vocally share what has happened to them, but they can write it out. And that's very therapeutic. I think it's important to allow yourself to feel the fullness of your feelings, whether it's grief, whether it's anger, whether it's pain, or loss, without attaching it to your future meaning, your future self. The road toward healing may involve several small steps mixed with a desire to get up and move forward. And even though you may feel like you're not in a position today to do it, there is hope. Okay? You'll look back and then you'll say, oh my God, I made it through. And you'll be on your feet and you'll be able to share this story of restoration and renewedness like myself. Is it work? Absolutely. Is it painful? Absolutely. Emotional healing can be incredibly rewarding, but it also can be painful in the interim. And my pastor always says this statement all the time: it's going to hurt before it helps. And it truly can be painful, but sometimes without pain, you can't grow. You got to get past the pain. And so what I think tends to happen with a lot of people, and when I look at relationships today, it's just easier to stay in the pain because we don't like the way it feels. And then when I talked about in my last podcast, getting outside your comfort zone, that's getting outside your comfort zone. It's taking you outside of something that isn't comfortable, and all the time it isn't going to feel good. And it's not. And you go, well, Sharon, how do I know if I'm healing? Honestly, there isn't a finish line to cross that signifies that you are fully healed, that you are a fully healed human being. However, emotional healing can sometimes be so gradual, you might not even realize how much you've healed. Other people might notice it before you. I personally think that what's going to happen is that you learn to manage it so that it doesn't manage you. Let me repeat that. Emotional healing is really you learning how to manage the emotions that you are feeling so it does not manage you. You'll be able to one day look back at a situation without being overwhelmed by emotion. You can better bounce back and face adversity when it happens in your life. Your willingness to step outside of your comfort zone and simply feel greater sense of peace. This means that you are actually healing. You are at a better place with your emotional brokenness. There are many deeper levels of emotional healing to be discovered. You'll find some things you love about yourself. You'll find some things you don't love about yourself. But I want you to do your best to live in a way that honors and supports your continuous journey of being emotionally healed and balanced. This will allow you to experience ever expanding emotional healing that will improve in your life all around: physical, spiritual, financial, emotional, mental well-being, your happiness in your life, as well as your connection to yourself and to others. And you might say, well, what are some benefits to, me healing? And some of the benefits to emotional healing is that you will have better cardiovascular health. You will potentially live a longer life. You will lower your cortisol level, your stress hormone, lower your heart rate. You are less likely to develop an upper respiratory infection or a common cold or the flu, etc. when we are dealing with our emotional and working on our emotional brokenness. As I said, emotional brokenness does change us. Yes, that broken crown will still color, but it may not necessarily work the same way. But be in tune that God knows our purpose. Okay? He knows that we are a crown with a purpose, despite every single thing that we have done to fall short. Okay? We should not allow ourselves to beat ourselves down. We have to stand up and be bold. We have to continue to do amazing things. We have to choose to be great, despite of everything that has happened to us has caused us some emotional brokenness, because we know that the broken crown still colors. Many times what we see as our biggest regrets and our failures and mistakes become what God uses the most in our lives. God can transform our brokenness into something more beautiful than we could ever imagine. He takes our mess and he creates us into a masterpiece. God is our artist, and our lives are his canvas. If we allow him to take those broken pieces and put them back together. I always want you to remember, no matter what you go through in life, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And anything that was set out to destroy you, God will use for the greater of your good. Trust me, I know, I'm a living witness to that. God uses broken things. He uses broken soil to produce crops. He uses broken clouds to give us rain. He uses broken grain to give us bread. He uses broken bread to give us strength. And he uses broken people to do great things. God uses your broken pieces. For God, broken pieces are not put in the trash. For God don't make no junk. He mends them together one by one until it is made whole. God is one who created you. Therefore, no matter how you feel or what you've been through that's made you broken, he can mold you back to your best piece. For you are God's masterpiece. Thank you all for tuning in to this week's educational therapy session. Last I checked, broken crowns still work. Yes, you do. You are amazing. Until our next session, keep educating yourself, for we know education is power. Use your power of choice. It is yours all day, every day. Be blessed. Take care. Love and appreciate you.